everyone. I know I'm standing immediately after a coffee break, and so we'll try to keep this moving and make this interactive. So today, I want to really, in the next 19 minutes and 55 seconds, kind of cover off on three specific topics in three areas that I'm hoping that we can all walk away with. Number one, the e-com market and the growth that we're seeing globally, right? I think oftentimes being here in the US and being such a significant, large, homogeneous market, we think about US e-com growth. Wirecard, and I'll talk a little bit about who we are, but the ability to broaden and look at our work across 5 continents and see some of those trends of how we're seeing growth is going to be really important. Two, the fact that we're at the Mobile Payments Conference, and my view and the approach is I think mobile as an ecosystem, we're definitely at a point in time where mobile obviously is going to be a key, potentially the key driver and the key pillar of commerce going forward, but how that's going to need to really operate in a unified ecosystem, right? When we're going to be successful, it's going to be enabled by breaking down the silos, whether they be cultural, whether they be data-driven, and really understand how mobile plays in the lives of our shoppers, of those end consumers, and then how we deliver overall. And then the third point, and we spend a lot of time talking to retailers, but also clients like airlines as well, how by taking unified approach, we fundamentally believe not only is that where the world is going, but also that we see the outsized opportunity for the movers that are going to get that right. So just a little bit about Wirecard very quickly. We're a global payments technology firm. We are headquartered in Munich, Germany, publicly traded on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. We've been around for 20 years now. Last year, €2 billion top line, a little over 300,000 customers, operate on 5 continents. You can see here, there's the globe. We cover a bunch of it. We love the work that we do, serving clients in the airline, retail, FI, and then digital spaces. So a little bit about our business model, which I think is the reason that I'm standing in front of you guys and giving this view and perspective. Wirecard, this is a nice complicated slide, especially for everyone in the back. But the idea and fundamentally the space that we occupy is we sit on both sides of the payment transaction. We're a global payment acquirer and processor, so accepting payments through omni-channel. We have at this point, over 120 methods of payment acceptance. In Europe, we have a bank. We have a set of e-money licenses and bank sponsorships throughout the world. And then we have the ability to be able to do payouts as well, whether that is a customer rebate, whether that is a refund payment, whether that is a loan disbursement or payout, whether that's someone for a 1099 or a gig worker. So for us, we sit on both sides of that transaction, and we think in this day and age, with the platform economies that we see, our business model clips very nicely in under that. And again, we do that globally. So that's a little bit about us. And so for us, sharing of data and understanding what that data looks like from a transaction, the ability to be able to take the power of acceptance data, inform the payout decision, or vice versa is going to be critical. And fundamentally, how we power that omni-channel e-commerce experience is something that we come to work and do every day. So really enough about the Wirecard, who we are, what we do, but to start to set the stage, when we look at e-com on a global scale, you can see the numbers here. Obviously, significant growth. Right in the U.S., you're talking about 14% year-over-year growth. From 18 to 19, that's pretty impressive. But then you look at a market like India or a market like China at that scale, and you see the growth there, right? Over 27% in China, and you're talking about over $1 trillion in transactions. And I think while that's interesting, right, and I'm presenting a couple numbers that are particular to those one geographies. The number on the right-hand side of the page, 57% of global online shoppers making purchases from overseas retailers, that's kind of really, really important for us, right? Because while we are making strong headway in delivering into whatever the cultural norms are for the market we might be operating in, the idea and the component of cross-border is something that we can't forget in any of this, because as the world continues to get more global, that's a really important proof point. So how, from a payment standpoint, whether it be irrespective of the channel, mobile, digital, or in some cases in person, how are you starting to bridge those gaps? How are you starting to think about the different payment acceptance types and the payout types across all the markets that one might operate in, especially if you're a global or an enterprise player? So I think that's actually really quite interesting. So if e-com is kind of part of the whole pie, well, then the next step, because it is the mobile payments conference, right? We've got to talk a little bit about mobile commerce, is mobile sales vis-a-vis actual e-com. So these are some pretty interesting stats where you talk about, this chart very much says total m-commerce sales. So m-commerce being defined as, I am on my phone because Bill's Pinterest speech was so interested, and I've gone and made a payment and bought that good or service on the mobile phone. We'll talk a little bit later about actually tapping through NFC or using one of the pays, but this is the actual m-commerce. So in 2019, right, we're expected to see of globally 67.2% of sales are going to be coming from the mobile channel, which is significant. Now, intuitively, that kind of makes sense, right? I mean, all of us have smartphones. We're all going to go back to in a hotel, an airport, sit somewhere. I mean, that stat itself, if you pin it back to user behavior, starts to really kind of compute. However, just when you think about the significance and the magnitude, for folks that have been to this conference year over year, for folks that go to other conferences, just how quickly that stat has grown and what we've seen that whole ecosystem grow up globally, I mean, it's pretty stunning and amazing. So, all right, audience poll question. Do you believe that mobile sales will eventually replace traditional commerce, as in person? If you say yes, raise your hand. All right, mixed bag, that's good. That helps me with my next slide. That's like, so within mobile payments now, right? So specifically talking about, now I am standing at the checkout line and I am making a purchase, let's say like an NFC type of purchase with one of the pays with my phones. There's a couple interesting things that we see. So number one, smartphone ownership, not just mobile phone ownership, but smartphone ownership growing in emerging markets. The recent stat by Pew Research, so last year, 47% of populations in emerging countries actually now own smartphones. That's up from 30% just the year prior to that. So a 10% growth year over year. So when you think about the ability to be able to, whether it's transact, whether it's communicate, whether it's to make payments on those phones, that is a significant jump that we see. So when we think about this overall conversion, we heard about it earlier, the conversion of cash into digital, and that is a significant driver of that, and that will continue to be. Retailers and customers around the world adopting mobile payments. Look, I think even here in the US, if you just think about your local shops and stores and the places where you're in and you're frequently transacting, as point of sale terminals continue to get updated, those terminals are continuing to be have acceptance for both mobile payments as well as contactless cards. So it's just as the evolution of the technology changes, even the underlying infrastructure that we see retailers embedding are there now, and that's going to continue to grow year over year, right? So fundamentally, even a couple of years ago, for probably a lot of us in the US, we were all excited for our latest Android or Apple phone that had to pay. You go to make the payment, and it's like at one Walgreens at one place, and now the ubiquity of those opportunities and those point of sales have significantly increased. And then the idea about mobile payments continuing to be faster and more secure. I'm sure you guys are going to hear a lot about this, but our view is, and obviously different ecosystem participants, whether it's facial recognition, whether it's continued advancement of biometric protocol, or regulatory kind of bodies informing policy, we see the fundamental shift so that all of a sudden you have, and we're in a place even today, but we will continue to have a place where the prevalence of the technology on a global basis, the user ability to understand that technology, and the actual facilitation by retailers to drive it are actually in place. So I've been in and around the mobile payment space since 2008, and every year was going to be the year of mobile payments. And I think we're finally at that point where we see that snowball really continuing to get momentum, not just in select pockets and select use cases that we all hear about at conferences like this, but actually on a global scale. So this is interesting. I want to kind of bridge this back and continue to, our view, being a global player operating on 5 continents, like I really want to bring this back to the idea in the global world that we're living in and how important that really is. So the stat on the left-hand side of the page, 67% of consumers directing at least 10% of their online spending to cross-border merchants. Another data point just to kind of throw at you that I read recently, within that same realm, 35% of all US digital shoppers actually have purchased a good or a service from a cross-border merchant. Of that, the logic for 45% of them was because they actually couldn't get that good or service in, let's say, in the US, right? So it shows, again, the global society that we're operating under. So for all of us, irrespective of where we sit in that ecosystem, that industry, the idea about being able to think about, if most of us are here and operate in the US, even if you have a base of US consumers, to be able to pull it back and look at the customer data and say, where are my customers spending their time? What services are they availing themselves of? On a global scale, what are the cultural norms that make the most sense? How do we actually think about delivering that good or that capability? So that's kind of one. The second is, and this is really interesting, so consumers spending an additional $131 in following a $100 online transaction. The day wrap around that is in the 15-day period following that transaction, right? So the halo effect that retailers are actually seeing from this ability. And this starts to go to the whole thesis of unified commerce or omni-channel. Obviously, intuitively, it makes sense. But the actual very real statistics and the data that are now showing the idea of the actual amounts that are being increased so that retailers can look and take a step back and say, we're actually seeing this. And by the way, in order to do that and facilitate that, we are all consumers, right? For us, the ability to be able to go do that is as simple as if I'm in a mobile store, I'm in a mobile experience, and then I go step out and I'm standing in the in-store experience and it feels completely disparate or different. It's frustrating. It's frankly one of the simplest ways of shopping cart abandonment, and we're going to move on and find that best experience, right? So for us, this chart here, when we look at the opportunity between looking at our clients on a global basis, this really shows when we think about actually delivering across omni-channel, what that means and how that drives ultimate value for, let's say in that case, that end retailer. So whether it's starting and thinking about dynamic pricing, so knowing where that shopper is, understanding how that sales growth and offers they're going to be able to put in front of them could drive, we're seeing 2 to 5%. Actual consumer credit, so big trend that we're seeing probably outside of, I don't know how much it's going to be talked about today, but the idea about the growth of point of sale financing and how lending is making its way to point of sale. Obviously, there's a huge ability to be able to take for larger ticket and larger purchases, whether it's on the mobile, in-store, or otherwise, the ability to be able to incent that, that's a significant idea about driving that order size. Loyalty, right? I mean, it's obvious, and we've been talking about loyalty for decades at this point, but to be able to contextually deliver that, to be able to drive that spend back is significant. The idea of an in-store assistant. So this goes back to the halo comment about if you're thinking about whether that's an actual live person, whether that's a chatbot, the ability to be able to think about how you can maybe present offers where you can send a shopper to another store locally. You have the ability to be able to, maybe if it's not right there, you can do same-day shipping. These contextual services, again, whether they be human or not, the ability to be able to think about conversion percentage, ultimately get that sale so that your consumer isn't standing there and looking and saying, you know what, I'm just going to go to my best other, insert large e-tailer that may or may not be in Seattle and just go ahead and make that order, right? And then last but not least, data and analytics. Fundamentally, reducing churn, reducing churn, reducing churn. The more relevant that you can use your data to be able to share across silos. So if you're getting something from a mobile channel and you're getting that signal, right? I mean, as I think all of us, as you build up channels, you build up the mobile channel because you have a set of functionalities you need to be able to deliver. You build up an in-store capability because you're thinking about merchandising and how you're going to deliver within that store. You're still maintaining the e-com platform and the plugins to all of your different disparate operational inputs. But now the best in breed retailers, I think a lot of the direct to consumer brands that we see fundamentally are starting and building these businesses from a place where we go into blurred boundaries, where they are starting from a point of, we're not going to look at the metric of same store sales, right, from in store. We're looking at all our channels and fundamentally how all of our channels are delivering upon the ability to be able to sell that good or service, to be able to build a relationship with the customer. So therefore, that's great, right? It doesn't, the mobile channel doesn't need to count for the sale. What simply counts is actually the sale. And maybe that was starting to be informed by the 73% of overall consumers that actually started and used mobile as a search point, but bought that good in store. That's great, because that's an interaction with my brand in that experience. And that's something where we think about that trend and sitting with retailers and sitting with market research and consumers, that idea and that evolution of those brands and evolution of that journey is something that folks are very much still contemplating with today. And I think the idea is to be able to, the more that you can drop those when we're talking about borders, not country borders, but the actual borders of how within your home you can make that purchase and you can keep facilitating. Because look, there is, as much as I referenced the company in Seattle, when we think about looking across the globe, the number of e-com native brands that are looking to be able to take time, attention, and dollars from, especially for the folks that are in store. We think that the in-store asset is incredibly powerful. We think the ability to be able to, especially for larger ticket items, think home furnishings, think some sporting goods categories, the ability to be able to touch and feel and then inform and maybe order, that's going to be really, really important. You know, you look at Target's recent really strong earnings that they had, fundamentally predicated upon a physical plant, a physical store. That idea about in-store, the in-store is very much there and real, and I think the players that are going to make it survive, sustain, and win are the ones that are going to have the ability to say, how do we use that in-store for all that it's meant to be? How do we ensure that the back end is plugged in so that we can be really efficient with how we route our ordering, how we fundamentally deliver upon that, and how do we make sure that customer data is connected? It's easy to say, it's a lot harder to do, but again, even more than 3 years ago, we're very much in a place where at this point, those retailers are building those technologies and those capabilities. And I think that, you know, looking forward, so this idea about unified commerce and this ability to be able to deliver across those channels, you know, a couple things that we see from payments, as much as it's kind of sounds ironic, but our belief is that payments are going to disappear into the background, right? The idea of whether it is facial recognition, whether it is an actual thumbprint or a handprint, right? If I'm going to profess to saying dropping borders and removing borders are going to be the way forward, then fundamentally as a payments company, we need to be able to be in a position to be able to facilitate that, to be able to encourage that and drive that to see adoption. And we're very much seeing that for sure. Data-driven opportunities. Again, this to me, from a technology standpoint, sure, many of us in the companies we work for, we can enable this, but I think that's actually more, I would say, and my argument would be that's more of a cultural norm within your company, right? The ability to be able to properly capture that data, and then also the ability to be able to then break down those cultural silos and be able to pass that data, actionalize it. The technology is there, of course, but the opportunity, I think, is one that's very much of, are we getting the right inputs? And culturally, how are we thinking about this organization? And that, to me, is kind of mission critical. And then back to seamless experiences. So China, Alipay, Smile to Pay, right? You're able to check out with that smile. So the idea about how you're going to continue to integrate that in that shopping experience. If I have just one example, if I have the ability to, you know, I've downloaded Insert Stores app on my phone and I've picked up a good or a service, right? There's no reason if I look at the checkout queue and it's 1,000,000 miles long and I don't know, I got to head back to the airport to get my flight. There's no reason if I don't have that experience with the right technology today, I can simply click a button, walk, and check on out, right? And I think that's where we think about an actual unified experience that we're really excited about delivering for. So one kind of plug, but it just brings it to life. Like any good technology company, we have an innovation lab. So rest assured, rest easy. Our innovation lab is based in our Munich headquarters. And so one of the things that we've launched and we've prototyped is this idea about a smart mirror. And I give this example not as a shameless plug, because I'm asking you guys to all buy smart mirrors that are now out front, but more about how we think about that's bringing channels. So what we prototyped is an actual mirror where you can, a retailer would be able to install this in their stores. I've gone and purchased and thought about, you know, I'm looking to buy whatever, another button-down shirt. I can go in, I put that in my basket on my phone. I go into the smart mirror. I'm actually able to select that specific style. I can lock in on that. I'm going to see what's available right now. I have the ability to say, great, I can pick this up, or it's going to be delivered to me in one day because they need to get it out to me. And then very simply to be able to check out, what happens when I check out is I actually just hit a button, a QR code, it pops up on the smart mirror. I capture that with that brand's actual app, and then I'm on my way. So for us, we launched this not only because I'm sure there's an actual commercial dialogue going on with a lot of retailers, but that's just a good example of how we actually, a different way to think about omni-channel and how we're ultimately delivering for the consumer. Because fundamentally, we see that's where the world is going, and that's how quickly the world is moving. So the winning solution, right? So in all of that, I think a couple points that I would leave us with. Number one, the world's big. The world continues to go more and more global, and we do truly live in a society where the norms and the cultural norms of our global society continue to converge, right? So not only is there a convergence within our cultural norms and our global society, then there's also this combination of unified channels. So the idea about breaking down those silos through data, through cultural norms, through the conversations you're having with your colleagues that might exist across the mobile channels, and really kind of probing how are we thinking about using these, how do we interact as users, is surely a winning one. And then the ability to be able to share that data and pass that data back, we fundamentally think that not only are you going to see the ability to look at taking a unified approach in one that is going to deliver from a customer experience standpoint, but that's certainly going to deliver from a margin and a growth standpoint. So I am 45 seconds over now, so let me pause there and say thanks for the time and opportunity. It's great to be here at the conference.